The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated silently in the darkness of space. Inside its gleaming halls, tension filled the air like a thick fog. Representatives from 47 different alien species had gathered in the Great Council chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes across the curved seating areas. Ambassador Lee Minute-Ho walked slowly to the center of the chamber. His black uniform bore the simple emblem of Earth, a blue circle with green continents. Around him, alien eyes watched with barely hidden anger. Some glowed red, others were compound like insects, and a few seemed to shift colors with their owners' moods. All of them stared at the human with the same expression. They wanted him gone. The human ambassador had seen this day coming for months. Every council meeting had grown more hostile. Every human action was questioned, criticized, and condemned. His people were called troublemakers, chaos bringers, and worse. The other species spoke of humanity like they were a disease that needed to be cured. From his tall crystalline podium, Chancellor Veldar of the hegemony slowly rose to his feet. His blue skin seemed to glow under the chamber's lights, and when he spoke, his words echoed through the translation devices that turned his alien language into sounds the other species could understand. The human question has reached its conclusion, Veldar announced, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. Your species has broken our laws 17 times in this cycle alone. You refuse to follow our guidance. You ignore our wisdom. You spread your chaos across systems that have known peace for centuries. In the water-filled sections of the chamber, the aquatic depth swimmers made bubbling sounds of agreement. Their dolphin-like bodies moved gracefully through their transparent containers as they showed their support for the Chancellor's words. Nearby, the insectoid hive speakers clicked their mandibles in a rhythm that meant disapproval in their language. But not all species joined in the condemnation. The warrior race called the Kethmori sat in complete silence. Their ambassador, his face marked with battle scars from countless wars, watched the proceedings with calculating eyes. He alone seemed to understand something the others missed. Lee Minute-Ho remained calm despite the hostility surrounding him. He had expected this moment. His aide, Captain Park Dearsoam, stood quietly behind him. She was a military officer, chosen for this mission because Earth's leaders knew diplomacy might not be enough. Her hand rested casually near her weapon, though she knew it would be useless against 47 different species. Chancellor Veldar continued his speech, his voice growing stronger with each word. For too long, we have tried to guide humanity toward civilization. We have shown patience when you destroyed our carefully planned trade routes. We have shown mercy when you interfered in conflicts that were none of your concern. We have shown wisdom when you refused to accept our superior knowledge. The Chancellor paused, looking directly at Lee Minute-Ho. But our patience has limits. Our mercy has boundaries. Our wisdom tells us that some species cannot be saved from their own nature. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Species that had never agreed on anything before now found unity in their dislike of humanity. The crystalline Zephyrians chimed like wind bells, their bodies catching and reflecting light in patterns that showed their emotions. The plant-like Vidanians rustled their leaf-covered limbs in what their people considered applause. The ultimatum is simple, Veldar declared, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute authority. Humanity will submit to full council oversight. You will surrender your military independence to our peacekeepers. You will accept our governance of all human colonies and settlements. Your ships will fly under our flags. Your decisions will require our approval. The Chancellor's blue skin seemed to glow brighter as he delivered the final condition. Or you will face immediate expulsion from this council and complete economic isolation. No species will trade with you. No station will offer you fuel or supplies. You will be alone in the vast darkness of space. Lee Minute-Ho felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Behind him, Captain Park Dearsoam made a small movement with her hand, a signal they had agreed upon before the meeting. It told him that Earth's leaders had already made their decision. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no begging for mercy. The human ambassador looked around the chamber one final time. He saw species that humanity had helped in the past now turning their backs. He saw civilizations that owed their freedom to human intervention now calling for human submission. He saw the galaxy's representatives choosing comfort over justice, control over freedom. The Terran Federation hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately, Lee Minute-Ho announced. His voice was steady and clear, cutting through the chamber's sudden silence like a sharp blade through silk. You wanted us gone? You have your wish. The reaction was immediate. Some species began chattering excitedly among themselves. Others sat in stunned silence. A few seemed unsure whether to celebrate or worry about what they had just heard. But Lee Minute-Ho was not finished. He took one step forward, his dark eyes scanning the faces that had condemned his species. But remember this moment when the darkness comes calling. Remember that you chose to stand alone. Remember that you drove away the only species willing to fight for others without asking for payment. As the human delegation began to file out of the chamber, Chancellor Velvar's triumphant smile began to fade. Something in the human's voice, some certainty in his final words, made the alien leader feel suddenly uneasy. The victory felt hollow, like winning a battle but losing something far more important. The great doors of the council chamber closed behind the humans with a sound like thunder. The galaxy had spoken, and humanity had listened. Now both sides would live with the consequences of this day. 8 months had passed since the humans walked out of the Galactic Council chamber. Across the galaxy, many species celebrated what they called the Great Peace. Trade Minister Yulsen, a tall alien with purple skin and 4 arms, stood before crowds on dozens of worlds, announcing the good news. Commercial efficiency has increased by 30%, he declared, his voice broadcasting to billions of beings across council space. Without human interference, our trade routes flow smoothly. Our shipping schedules are no longer disrupted by their chaotic military exercises. The galaxy has finally achieved the harmony we sought for so long. The crowds cheered. On crystal worlds, light beings danced in patterns of joy. In underwater cities, aquatic species sang songs of celebration. Even the usually serious plant people swayed their branches in happiness. It seemed the council had been right to force humanity out. But far from the core worlds, in the outer edges of known space, a different story was unfolding. Captain Kim Tae-Minute gripped the arms of his command chair as alarms blared throughout his merchant ship. The Lucky Star was not built for combat, just for carrying goods between the mining colonies and the inner worlds. Through the main viewscreen, he watched in horror as pirate ships swarmed around another convoy, their weapons tearing apart the defenseless freighters. "Captain," called his navigator, Choi So-young, from her station near the front of the bridge. Her voice was tight with worry. "That's the 5th attack this week. The council peacekeepers are supposed to patrol this sector, but I haven't seen one of their ships in months." Kim nodded grimly, his weathered face showing the stress of constant danger. Most of his crew were humans who had stayed in the outer colonies after the withdrawal. They were miners, traders, and settlers who had built lives far from Earth. Now they found themselves trapped in increasingly dangerous space with no protection. "Where are the peacekeepers?" asked his engineer, Lee Dong-woo, as he climbed up from the engine room. His hands were covered in grease from trying to keep their old ship running. The council promised to protect these trade routes when they took over from human patrols. Kim looked out at the stars, remembering how different things used to be. Before the withdrawal, human patrol ships had kept these routes safe. Fast, well-armed vessels crewed by experienced officers had hunted pirates with ruthless efficiency. The criminals had learned to avoid human-protected space because they knew they would not survive long if caught. Now those ships were gone. The human naval bases had been evacuated. The communication relays that had allowed instant contact with Earth's military forces had been shut down. The Terran Defense Network, which had watched over this entire region for decades, had gone completely dark. "The predators are getting bolder," So-young observed, checking her instruments. "My sensors show at least 12 different pirate gangs operating in what used to be Sector 7 alone. They know the council ships are too slow and too few to catch them." Meanwhile, deep beneath the Swiss mountains on Earth, Admiral Yoon Jae-woo stood in the war room that had once coordinated humanity's galactic defense efforts. The chamber was vast and dark, lit only by the glow of holographic displays that showed the entire galaxy in 3 dimensions. Red zones marked areas where violence was increasing. Yellow areas showed regions becoming unstable. The few remaining blue zones indicated places where peace still held. The Admiral was a veteran of many conflicts, his gray hair and lined face telling the story of decades spent protecting others. Now he watched as the galaxy slowly descended into chaos without human intervention. "Sir," reported Commander Han Soo-jin, a young officer with sharp eyes and quick reflexes. She stood at a control station covered with blinking lights and streaming data. "The last of our deep space monitoring stations have gone silent. All our sensors and communication relays in council space have been shut down as ordered." "Good," Admiral Yoon replied quietly, though his expression showed no joy. "Now we wait and see if they can handle what's coming." The withdrawal had been carefully planned. Every human ship, every human base, every human listening post had been systematically evacuated. Weapons and equipment that couldn't be moved had been destroyed to prevent them from falling into alien hands. Most importantly, the vast network of sensors and early warning systems that humanity had built to protect the galaxy had been turned off. Dr. Lim Haijin looked up from her research terminal on the other side of the room. She was the Federation's chief xenobiologist, specializing in threats from outside the galaxy. Her computer screens showed data streams from probes sent into the empty void between star systems. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying a note of concern that made everyone in the room look toward her. "Our long-range probes are detecting movement in the deep void between galaxies. The energy signatures match our worst-case projections from the threat assessment we prepared 3 years ago." Admiral Yoon's expression hardened like stone. For 3 years, human scientists had been tracking something approaching from the darkness between galaxies. They had tried to warn the Council, but the alien leaders had dismissed human concerns as fear-mongering designed to make humanity seem more important. "How long?" the Admiral asked simply. "Based on current trajectory and speed, approximately 18 months until they reach the outer rim of Council space," Dr. Lim replied, checking her calculations. "Maybe less if they accelerate." The war room fell silent except for the quiet humming of computers and displays. Everyone present understood what this meant. The Council had driven away the one species that knew about the approaching threat and had spent years preparing to face it. Now they would have to deal with it alone, without human weapons, human tactics, or human experience. Admiral Yoon walked to the main display and stared at the red zones spreading across the galaxy map. "They wanted to handle their own problems," he said softly. "Now they'll get their chance." 2 years had passed since the humans walked away from the Galactic Council. Most species had forgotten about them, busy celebrating their new age of peace and prosperity. Trade flowed smoothly, disputes were settled quickly, and the galaxy seemed more organized than ever before. Then came the day that changed everything. Deep Space Station Omega-7 floated alone in the darkness between star systems. It was one of dozens of monitoring posts that watched the empty void for any signs of danger. The station's crew of 12 aliens from different species had grown comfortable with their quiet duty. Nothing ever happened in the deep void. Nothing ever came from the darkness between galaxies. Communication Officer Zexnal was drinking his morning stimulant when his instruments began screaming warnings. Energy readings unlike anything in the databases flooded his screens. He leaned forward, his 4 eyes trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Command," he spoke into his transmitter, "we're detecting movement in deep void, Sector 97 Alpha. Multiple contacts approaching at impossible speeds." Station Commander Velcon rushed to the main viewing port. Through the transparent metal, she could see lights moving in the distance. But they were wrong somehow. They didn't shine like normal ships. Instead, they seemed to swallow the starlight around them, creating patches of deeper darkness against the black of space. "Unknown vessels approaching," Zexnal transmitted back to Council space, his voice growing panicked. They're impossible. The ships are alive." The transmission cut to static as Omega-7 simply disappeared. One moment it was there, the next it was nothing but scattered debris and strange energy patterns that hurt to look at. Across Council space, emergency alarms began to sound. Chancellor Velvar stood in the Great Council chamber, but now the mood was very different from 2 years ago. Instead of confident speeches about galactic harmony, panic filled the air. Representatives from dozens of species spoke at once, their voices creating a chaos of fear and confusion. "Order! Order!" Velvar shouted, his blue skin pale with stress. Around the chamber, holographic displays showed empty space where entire star systems used to be. 3 sectors had gone completely dark in just 2 weeks. Science Minister Dalketh stepped forward, his usually calm voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Chancellor, our first contact protocols have completely failed. These entities show no interest in communication of any kind. They don't respond to greetings, warnings, or even surrender offers." The minister's 6 arms trembled as he operated his data device. "They consume everything in their path. Ships, stations, orbital platforms, even the metal structures around dead worlds. Nothing is left behind except empty space and energy readings our scientists cannot explain." A surviving probe had managed to capture images before being destroyed. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing something that made several species representatives gasp in horror. The ships were massive, easily 10 times the size of the largest council vessels. But they were not built like any technology the galaxy had ever seen. Their surfaces writhed and moved like living skin. Tentacles longer than city blocks reached out from their hulls, grabbing and pulling apart anything they touched. They seem to absorb light itself, creating zones of absolute darkness around them. They move with intelligence and purpose, Dalketh continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They strip entire systems of all useful materials, then move on. Our estimates suggest they've consumed enough resources to build a fleet of thousands of ships. The aquatic depth swimmers in their water tanks made sounds of distress. The crystalline Zephyrians' bodies flickered with colors that meant terror in their language. Even the usually brave plant people pulled their branches close to their bodies in fear. Captain Bae Ji-hoon had been chosen to command the Council's first military response. He was an experienced officer from the Keth-Mori warrior race, with scars from dozens of battles across his face and arms. His ship, the Harmony's Edge, was the newest and most powerful vessel in the Council fleet. 15 ships followed him to the Kepler 442 system, where 3 of the organic monsters were consuming the remains of a mining colony. It should have been more than enough firepower to deal with any threat the galaxy had ever faced. The battle began at 1432 Standard Time. Captain Bae ordered his ships to spread out and attack from multiple angles, using the classic tactics that had won countless victories against pirates and rebels. Their weapons lit up space with brilliant energy beams. Missiles streaked toward the organic vessels like bright stars. For a few minutes, it looked like the Council forces might actually damage their enemies. Then the monsters began to change. "Captain," shouted his weapons officer over the comm system. "Our energy beams aren't working anymore. It's like they're absorbing them." "Switch to physical projectiles," Bae ordered, but even as he spoke, he could see the creatures adapting to those weapons too. Their surfaces grew thicker, harder, more resistant to every attack. The organic ships fought back with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Beams of pure darkness tore through Council shields like they weren't there. Tentacles reached across impossible distances to crush ships in their grip. "They're learning from every attack we make," Bae transmitted back to the fleet. "Every weapon we use, they find a way to defend against it. These aren't just ships, they're predators that evolve while they fight." The battle lasted exactly 43 minutes. When it was over, 13 Council ships had been destroyed or consumed. Only 3 vessels limped back to Nexus Prime, their hulls scarred and their crews traumatized by what they had witnessed. The survivors' report spread terror throughout Council space. The entities were given a name that spoke to everyone's deepest fears: Devourers. In the emergency session that followed, the Great Council chamber was filled with desperate voices. Some species openly wept. Others demanded immediate evacuation of their homeworlds. A few brave representatives quietly suggested the unthinkable. "Perhaps," whispered the Keth-Mori ambassador, "it is time to contact the humans." Chancellor Veldar's response came like thunder. "We are the Galactic Council. We do not beg for help from exiles and outcasts." But even as he spoke those words, Veldar could see the doubt in the eyes around him. The galaxy was facing something beyond their understanding, and the species they had driven away might be the only ones who could help them. Outside, in the cold darkness of space, the Devourers continued their advance toward the heart of Council space. 3 years had passed since the humans walked away from the Galactic Council. 3 years of watching the galaxy burn as the Devourers swept through system after system, consuming everything in their path. Now they had reached the heart of Council space itself. Nexus Prime, the massive station that had been the symbol of galactic unity, hung surrounded by nightmare creatures from the void between galaxies. The organic ships were so large they blocked out entire sections of stars, their writhing surfaces pulsing with alien life. Tentacles thick as city blocks reached out from their hulls, grabbing and crushing any Council ship that came too close. Chancellor Veldar stood in the command center, his blue skin now pale with exhaustion and fear. Through the transparent walls, he could see the remnants of 4 to 7 different species navies fighting desperately against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. Energy beams that had once been powerful enough to crack planets barely left marks on the Devourer hulls. "Status report," Veldar demanded, though he already knew the answer would be bad. Fleet Commander Zexcall limped over from his station, his arm in a sling from when his command ship had been destroyed 6 hours earlier. "We've lost 60% of our remaining forces. The Devourers are adapting to every weapon we use, every tactic we try. Our most powerful missiles now bounce off their hulls like toys." Around the command center, officers from dozens of species worked frantically at their stations. But Veldar could see the despair in their eyes. They all knew they were losing. The Great Galactic Council, with all its wisdom and advanced technology, was being destroyed by creatures they couldn't understand. A Keth-Mori warrior captain burst through the doors, his scarred face grim with bad news. "Chancellor, the Devourers have broken through our outer defense line. They're moving toward the station's main hull. We estimate 20 minutes before they reach the civilian sections. Veldar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of billions of lives on his shoulders. In the evacuation zones, families from dozens of worlds huddled together, waiting to see if they would live through the day. Children who had never known war now heard the sounds of battle echoing through the station's corridors. Communications officer Zalbeth suddenly straightened at her station, her large eyes wide with surprise. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of weapons fire and emergency alarms. "We're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. It's human." The command center fell silent except for the distant rumble of explosions. Everyone turned to look at the communication station, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. Then Admiral Shin Do-hyun's voice cut through the chaos like a sharp blade through silk. His words were calm, clear, and carried the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "This is the Terran Federation fleet. We're coming in." What happened next would be remembered for centuries across the galaxy. Space around Nexus Prime suddenly filled with bright flashes as ships appeared from quantum fold drives. But these were not the crude human vessels that Council species remembered from 3 years ago. These were sleek predators, their hulls gleaming with advanced armor and bristling with weapons that had never been seen before. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be. They flowed around the massive devourer creatures like water around rocks, striking where the organic ships were weakest and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Lieutenant Colonel on Mi Young led her fighter squadron through the maze of alien tentacles that reached out to crush them. Her small ship danced between attacks that would have destroyed a Council cruiser, her voice calm over the communication system. "Dragon Squadron, remember your training," she called to her pilots. "These things learn fast, but we learn faster. Show them what human adaptability really means." The fighters moved like a flock of birds, turning and diving in patterns that seemed impossible. When the Devourers adapted to one attack pattern, the humans immediately switched to something completely different. When the organic ships grew defenses against energy weapons, the human fighters used kinetic projectiles. When they adapted to those, the humans found entirely new ways to hurt them. The human capital ships unleashed firepower that made the Council's most powerful dreadnoughts look like children's toys. Beams of energy that could cut through asteroid belts tore into Devourer hulls. Missiles that moved faster than thought found weak points that Council weapons had never been able to touch. But it was more than just raw power that won the battle. It was the tactics that broke the Devourer's ability to adapt. Captain Oh Sung-ho commanded the battleship Soul's Hammer from his bridge high above the main weapons. His ship was the size of a small moon, carrying enough firepower to level entire worlds. But he used it with surgical precision, striking exactly where it would do the most damage. "They're not learning anymore," he reported to the fleet, watching his targeting displays with satisfaction. "They can't keep up with our tactical shifts. Every time they start to adapt to one strategy, we've already moved on to 3 different ones." The human ships changed their attack patterns every few minutes. They used different weapons, different formations, different approaches. Just when the Devourers began to understand one type of assault, the humans had already switched to something entirely new. The organic creatures, which had seemed invincible against Council forces, began to fall apart under the human attack. Their ability to evolve and adapt, which had made them nearly unstoppable, became useless when faced with an enemy that evolved even faster. The Battle of Nexus Prime lasted 17 hours. When it finally ended, the space around the Great Station was filled with cooling debris from the Devourer fleet. Not one of the organic monsters had survived. The nightmare creatures that had consumed entire sectors of the galaxy had been completely destroyed by the species the Council had driven away. As the last pieces of alien wreckage drifted past the station's viewing ports, Chancellor Veldar realized that everything he thought he knew about humans had been completely wrong. As the last pieces of destroyed Devourer ships drifted slowly past the great windows of Nexus Prime, Chancellor Veldar stood in his private office preparing the most important speech of his life. Around the massive space station, the human fleet hung in perfect formation, their ships showing battle scars but flying proudly with their victory. The Chancellor had spent hours writing his words of gratitude. He planned to thank humanity for saving the galaxy, to apologize for driving them away, and to invite them back into the Council with full honors. Surely the humans would understand that the Council had made a mistake. Surely they would want to return to their rightful place among the galactic community. Veldar activated his communication system and began to speak. "Admiral Shin Do-hyun of the Terran Federation, on behalf of the Galactic Council and all 4 to 7 member species, I wish to express our deepest." "Stop. Admiral Shin's voice cut through the Chancellor's prepared speech like a cold blade. The human's face appeared on the communication screen, his expression hard and unforgiving. "We didn't come back for you." The words hit Veldar like a physical blow. Around him, his advisors looked shocked and confused. This was not how they had expected the conversation to go. "We came back because Earth has colonies in this galaxy," Admiral Shin continued, his voice calm but firm. "We protect what is ours. The fact that this action also saved your council is purely incidental." Before Veldar could respond, another human appeared on the communication screen. Director Kang Eun-ji of Terran Intelligence was a small woman with sharp eyes and a mind that missed nothing. She carried a data pad filled with information that would change everything the council thought they knew about humanity. "Chancellor," Director Kang began, her voice professional but cold, "it's time you learned the truth about what really happened 3 years ago." She activated her data pad, and holographic displays filled the Chancellor's office with images and charts. "Humanity has been tracking the Devourer approach for over 5 years through deep space monitoring networks that your species never knew existed. Our sensors reach far beyond anything the Council ever built." Veldar stared at the displays in growing shock. The images showed human listening posts in the deep void, advanced technology hidden in asteroid fields, and surveillance networks that covered the entire galaxy. The humans had been watching everything, protecting everyone, without the Council ever knowing. "Your primitive technology was deliberate misdirection," Kang explained, her words falling like hammer blows. "We showed you only what we wanted you to see. Our real military capabilities, our true scientific achievements, our actual defensive networks, we kept all of that hidden." The director's eyes were cold as she continued. "Our military restraint during council meetings was not from weakness. It was from hope. We hoped that the galaxy could learn to defend itself. We hoped that given time and guidance, your species could grow strong enough to face real threats." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We were wrong." Around the Chancellor's office, alien advisors who had spent decades studying humanity realized that everything they thought they knew had been a lie. The species they had called primitive had been more advanced than any of them. The military they had called weak had been holding back its true power. The people they had called chaotic had been the only ones preparing for real danger. "We studied the Devourers for years," Director Kang went on. "We developed countermeasures, built specialized weapons, and prepared for this exact scenario. We simply waited to see if you could handle your own problems." Chancellor Veldar found his voice at last. "But why? Why hide your true capabilities? Why let us think you were weaker than us?" Admiral Shin answered this time, his expression softening slightly. "Because we hoped it wouldn't be necessary. We hoped that by working together, by sharing what knowledge we could, the galaxy would become strong enough to protect itself. We didn't want to be your protectors. We wanted to be your partners." The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Humanity had never been the problem the Council thought they were. They had been the solution to problems the Council never knew existed. As the human fleets prepared to leave Nexus Prime, something unprecedented happened. Communication channels across the galaxy filled with messages from grateful species. Requests for mutual defense partnerships flooded into human communication centers from worlds that had previously supported humanity's expulsion. The crystalline Zephyrians offered to share their most advanced technologies. The aquatic depth swimmers promised to open their underwater cities to human visitors. Even species that had never spoken to humans before now begged for protection and alliance. But humanity's response was very different from what the galaxy expected. Ambassador Ju Hyun-woo, now Director of External Affairs for the Terran Federation, sat in her office on Earth reviewing the thousands of requests. She was an experienced diplomat who had watched the galaxy turn its back on humanity 3 years ago. Now she held the power to decide who would receive human protection and who would face the darkness alone. "We will help those who need it," she announced in a broadcast to the galaxy. "But this time, we do things our way. No more councils voting on every decision. No more committees arguing while people die. If you want our protection, you accept our methods and follow our leadership." The final scene of this new chapter played out in Admiral Shin's private ready room aboard his flagship. He stood looking out at the stars through a great window, speaking to his fleet commanders through holographic communication. "Let this be a lesson to anyone listening across the void," he said quietly. "Humanity doesn't seek to rule the galaxy. We never wanted to be your masters. But if you threaten what we protect, if you touch what we have built, you will learn why apex predators don't need to prove they are dangerous." He paused, his eyes reflecting the starlight as he looked out at the galaxy that had once rejected his species. "They just are. the galaxy had finally learned the truth. Humans were not the chaotic primitives the Council had believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous, guardians who had chosen to walk away from those they protected. And in their absence, the universe had discovered exactly what humanity had been shielding them from all along. Now the galaxy would have to live with the consequences of driving away the only species that had truly cared about protecting others.